You can't even afford food or clothes, so shut your mouth, my father shouted during a family dinner. Seconds later, a helicopter landed on the lawn. I looked at him and laughed. My ride is here. My father fainted. My mother was left speechless. My name is Isabella Fontana, and I'm 27 years old. If you asked me to describe my life, I wouldn't hand you a resume. I'd hand you a song. Something slow and aching at first, with sudden bursts of light in the middle, and an ending most people wouldn't see coming. I live in Portland, Oregon, where it rains almost every day and the air smells like coffee and wet pine needles. My world is small by most people's standards. A one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore, a guitar leaning against the wall, sheet music scattered across the kitchen table like fallen leaves. My family calls me a dreamer. They don't mean it as a compliment. My sister Renata is a corporate lawyer in Seattle. My brother Lucas writes code somewhere in Silicon Valley, pulling 6 figures before he turned 25. My parents Carlos and Sonia Fontana are proud of both of them in the way that fills a room. Loud pride. The kind that gets told to neighbors and posted on Facebook. And me? I write songs. Songs my family has never once asked to hear. Except for 2 people. My grandparents. The only 2 people in my entire life who ever looked at what I was doing and said, keep going. I grew up on the east side of Portland in a modest 2-story house with beige walls and a backyard that smelled of damp soil and blackberry bushes. The kitchen always had something on the stove, and the living room carpet was the same shade of brown it had been since 1987. It wasn't a fancy house, but it had a heartbeat. Most of that heartbeat came from my grandfather. Seu Antonio wasn't famous. He'd played accordion in small Brazilian community halls and Portuguese neighborhood festivals for decades before his knees gave out. When I was a child, he'd sit in the corner of the living room on Sunday afternoons, pull the instrument onto his lap, and fill the whole house with music. Not background music. The kind that stops you mid-step. The kind that makes the air heavier and warmer at the same time. Donna Ruth, my grandmother, would sit across from him in her rocking chair, eyes closed, hands folded, smiling like she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere better. I was 7 the first time I tried to write a melody. It was 4 notes on a piece of paper, scribbled between math problems I hadn't finished. Seu Antonio found it on the kitchen table. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me to focus on my homework. He sat down, pressed the paper flat with his rough hand, and studied it like it was a map to something important. Isa, he said. He always called me Isa. Music is not just what you hear. It's what you carry. You carry it right, and one day it'll carry you. I never forgot that. My parents, on the other hand, had a very different map for my life. Dad managed a construction supply company. Mom taught chemistry at the local high school. They were good, hardworking people who measured success in diplomas and stability and things you could point to from across the room. Renata was their blueprint. Debate team captain, straight A student, law school at 22, partnership track by 28. She was everything they'd hoped for, wrapped in a blazer and a firm handshake. Lucas was the prodigy. Programming before he could drive. Internships in Silicon Valley before he graduated. The kind of kid who got written up in the school newsletter and then actually ended up doing what the newsletter predicted. And then there was me. The creative one. That's what they called me at family dinners. Said with a soft smile that never quite reached the eyes. Said with the faint undertone of a sigh. I'd sit at the table while Renata talked about depositions and Lucas talked about machine learning, and my parents' faces would glow with a particular kind of pride I had learned, by age 14, was not meant for me. When it was my turn, I'd mention a new song I was working on, a melody I'd heard in a dream, a set of lyrics that had come to me during the walk home from school. The table would go quiet, not the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your chest. Dad would say, "That's nice, Isa, but what about your grades?" Mom would press her lips together and say nothing, which was somehow worse. They didn't stop loving me. I want to be clear about that. They just didn't believe in what I loved. To them, music was a hobby that some people were foolish enough to mistake for a future. A phase. Something I'd grow out of once I understood how the world actually worked. Seu Antonio and Donna Ruth understood differently. On weekend sleepovers at their house, Grandpa would pull out old records and set them on the turntable. We'd sit in the living room while the needle crackled and the music filled every corner of the room. He'd teach me how to listen to the spaces between the notes, not just the notes themselves. How a pause could carry as much weight as a chord. How silence, when used right, was its own kind of sound. Those nights were my real education. Not scales, not theory, permission. Permission to take the dream seriously in a family that considered it irresponsible. By the time I was 18, the pressure at home had become a permanent hum. College brochures appeared on the kitchen counter, business programs, pre-law packets Renata had mailed from Seattle just in case, engineering brochures Dad had picked up from somewhere. I'd take them to my room, read none of them, and slide them to the back of my desk drawer. What I hadn't told anyone was that I'd already decided. I'd been writing songs until 2 a.m, notebooks full of verses and chord progressions, melodies that woke me up before my alarm. The idea of sitting in a lecture hall memorizing things I didn't care about Felt like sealing myself inside a box. Music wasn't just what I loved. It was the only thing that made complete sense to me, the only place where all the parts of me fit together without effort. The conversation happened on a Sunday morning in October. Mom had made pancakes. The kitchen smelled of coffee and maple syrup. Renata was visiting from Seattle, talking about a case her firm had just settled. Lucas was at the table with his laptop, half listening, half typing. Dad was in a good mood for once. I set down my fork and said it clearly. I'm not going to college. The room didn't just go quiet, it stopped. Dad put down his mug. What? I'm going to focus on my music. I'll work to pay rent. But I'm not applying to any school. Mom blinked like she'd misheard me. Isabella, be serious. I am serious. Renata leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Sam, I've seen people chase art and end up broke at 30, living in their childhood bedroom. You're too smart for this. Dad's voice rose. If you skip college, you are making the worst mistake of your life. And don't think you can stay here while you figure it out. This house is not a free ride. That was it. The line drawn in the floor. 2 weeks later, I packed my guitar, a duffel bag, and $400 I'd saved from a part-time job at the farmer's market. I found a small studio above a bookstore downtown. The floors creaked. The heater rattled. The only view was a brick wall. It was mine. And for the first time, even with nothing but uncertainty ahead of me, I felt like I could finally breathe. The first 2 years on my own were held together with instant noodles and stubbornness. My apartment above the bookstore smelled permanently of burnt coffee drifting up from the cafe next door. The radiator knocked every night at exactly 11 o'clock like it was reminding me to go to sleep. The floorboards had a soft spot near the bathroom that I learned to step around without thinking. It wasn't much, but I kept it clean, kept it mine, and that mattered more than I expected it to. During the day, I waited tables at a diner on Morrison Street. My feet hurt by noon and my back hurt by closing. I learned to smile at customers who didn't tip and stay quiet when the kitchen ran late. I learned to carry 4 plates at once and memorize orders without writing them down, because writing them down made certain regulars impatient. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent, barely, and left my nights free. At night, I wrote. Cross-legged on the floor with my guitar, the street lamp outside flickering like a slow heartbeat, I'd play until my fingers went stiff. I recorded rough demos on an old laptop with a $20 microphone I'd bought secondhand. Most of those recordings were terrible. Thin sound, wrong tempo, lyrics that tried too hard. I'd listen back, wince, and start again. I told myself each time. The next one will be better. My mom called every week. The conversations followed the same script. Sam, are you eating properly? Yes, Mom. Are you still doing the music thing? Yes, Mom. You could come home. Take a few classes at community college just to have something. No, Mom. Dad's calls were shorter. He'd ask if I'd found something more stable. I'd say I was doing fine. He'd go quiet in a way that said he didn't believe me but was tired of arguing. Then he'd say, all right, and hang up like the word cost him something. Lucas texted once, just one message. You're smart enough to do something else, you know? I didn't answer. The only calls I looked forward to came from Sue Antonio and Donna Ruth. Grandpa would ring from their landline, his voice crackling through the receiver, always saying the same thing in different ways. You're on the right road, Isa. Roads like this don't come paved. You build them as you go. Grandma sent care packages every few weeks, coffee beans from their favorite market, oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. Sometimes a $20 bill folded inside a paperback novel she thought I'd like, with a handwritten note tucked between the pages. Thinking of you. Keep playing. Those packages kept me going more than I ever told her. Then came the January night that changed everything. I was walking home from a closing shift, breath fogging in the cold air, keys already in my hand, when my phone buzzed. It was Donna Ruth. I could hear it in her voice before she finished the first sentence. That particular tightness people get when they're trying to hold themselves together for someone else's sake. Isa, it's your grandfather. He had a heart attack. They've taken him to St. Mary's. I didn't lock my apartment. I didn't change my shoes. I ran to the bus stop with my apron still tied around my waist and stood in the cold, willing the bus to come faster, my heart so loud it drowned out the street noise. By the time I reached the hospital, Donna Ruth was sitting alone in the waiting area, a paper cup of coffee going cold in her hands. Her eyes were red. A doctor came out not long after I arrived. The words were short, precise, final. He didn't make it. The funeral was held in a small church with wooden pews and stained glass that threw colored light across the floor. I played a hymn on my guitar. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the pick twice. I got through it. Afterward, I drove back to my apartment in silence and sat on the floor in my coat without turning on the lights. Then I opened my notebook. I wrote for hours, not carefully. I just poured every memory of Sue Antonio onto the page. The way his accordion sounded on rainy Sunday afternoons. The smell of his aftershave, something woody and faint. The weight of his hand on my shoulder when he told me to keep going. The way Donna Ruth smiled when he played, like she was somewhere only the two of them could reach. I called the song Rain an Accordion. I recorded it on my laptop with the cheap microphone, barely mixed it, and posted it online without much thought. I wasn't expecting anything. I just needed it out of my chest. A week later, my inbox was full. Musicians wanted to collaborate. An indie singer from Seattle named Priya had found the recording and asked if she could record her own version. I said yes, not fully understanding what that meant yet. When the song went live on her album 3 months later, something shifted. Streams climbed, playlists picked it up. People I'd never met were singing words I'd written on my apartment floor in the dark. For the first time, strangers were carrying my music. That single song blew the door open. Within weeks, a small independent label reached out asking me to write for one of their new artists. The offer was more money than I made waiting tables in 2 months. I pulled 3 all-nighters to deliver the track. When it released, it quietly crossed 200,000 streams in the first month. The work kept coming. Bands from Austin, folk duos from Denver, pop singers from Los Angeles. My inbox became a patchwork of accents and time zones, all asking for the same thing, that particular feeling in the writing, that space between the words where something aching lived. They didn't want Isabella Fontana. They wanted Lua Chuva, the pen name I'd chosen quietly, a nod to Grandpa and to that first song. Rain and music, the 2 things he'd given me. At first, the secrecy was fear. I didn't want my family to find out only to shrug it off or call it luck. Later, it became something more deliberate, a shield. The less they knew, the less they could chip away at. I taught myself to negotiate contracts from YouTube tutorials and late-night searches. I built a small network of session musicians and producers. I found a lawyer I paid per email. I stopped counting my worth in tips. By year 3, my bank account had crossed into 6 figures. By year 5, it had crossed into something I still had trouble saying out loud. 8 figures. I upgraded my guitar, my recording setup, my apartment, but only slightly. Still 1 bedroom. Still above the bookstore. If my parents ever visited, I wanted the room to look exactly like what they expected. Because what was coming needed to land without warning. The only person who knew the truth was Donna Ruth. I visited her every week, bringing vinyl records and blueberry scones from the bakery on her street. We'd sit together in the living room, the turntable spinning, and she'd close her eyes the way she always had when Grandpa played. "You've done it, Isa," she'd say softly. Antonio would be so proud. But slowly, visit by visit, things began to change. She'd ask me the same question 3 times in an hour. She'd forget which record was playing. She called me Margaret once, her own mother's name. The day she looked at me with genuine uncertainty, like she was trying to place my face, I felt something cold move through me. The diagnosis came a month later. Early-stage Alzheimer's. I drove home that night and sat at my desk for a long time, watching the city lights blur through the window. Then I opened a new notebook and started writing. Not a song this time. A plan. The plan started as a list. A single page in a plain notebook, written in the kind of handwriting you use when you're thinking faster than your hand can move. Items scratched out and rewritten, arrows pointing to other arrows, numbers in the margins that I kept adjusting upward. By morning, the list had become something closer to a blueprint. Donna Ruth couldn't stay in her house much longer. The place she'd lived in for 40 years had steep stairs, a bathroom with no grab bars, a kitchen with a stove she'd already left on twice without realizing. She lived alone now. After dark, there was no one there. I'd been stopping by every day, but I couldn't be everywhere. And what was coming with the Alzheimer's was only going to make the gaps more dangerous. A nursing facility was out of the question. I'd visited 2 of them once, years ago, accompanying a friend whose father had just been admitted. Clean floors and fluorescent lighting and a particular kind of silence that had nothing peaceful about it. Staff moving efficiently from room to room. Residents sitting in chairs by windows watching the parking lot. I'd walked out of both places with a feeling I couldn't shake for days. That was not going to be Donna Ruth's life, not while I had anything to say about it. I called Clara Menezes on a Tuesday morning. Clara had been my assistant for 2 years by then. She was sharp, discreet, and had the rare ability to take an impossible request and simply begin working on it without requiring lengthy explanations. I told her I needed a property outside the city, space, light, a garden, somewhere that felt like home from the moment you stepped through the door. Quiet enough to hear birds in the morning. But it also had to be safe. No hazardous stairs, wide doorways, a bathroom designed for someone who might need assistance. She started looking the next day. 3 weeks of tours followed. Overpriced new builds with no soul. Old farmhouses with charming exteriors and structural problems hiding behind the walls. A converted barn that smelled of damp wood. A glass and steel modern property that looked like an airport lounge and felt like one too. Then Clara sent me a listing with a single line of text beneath the address. "I think this is it." She was right. The estate was in West Lynn, about 20 minutes south of the city. Built in the 1920s, 3 stories, cream stucco walls, a roof of deep red tile that caught the afternoon sun like something out of a photograph. The garden was overgrown but full of potential. Tangled roses climbing over stone walls, maple trees that would turn blazing orange in autumn, A wide patio facing east where the morning light arrived unhurried. It needed work, significant work. I bought it the following week. No mortgage, no loan. The renovation became my second obsession, running parallel to the writing, filling the hours I wasn't at my desk. I hired an architect who specialized in historic homes and an interior designer who understood that beauty and practicality were not opposing forces. We installed an elevator so Donna Ruth would never need to navigate stairs. Her bedroom was given wide windows overlooking the garden, a quilted armchair in the corner, and shelves filled with her favorite books. The bathroom was designed to be safe without looking clinical. The music room took the longest to get right. I wanted it to feel like Grandpa's living room, but larger, warmer. A baby grand piano against the far wall, built-in shelves for vinyl records, soft lighting that could be adjusted to evening warmth, a turntable on a low wooden stand, the same height as the one So Antonio had kept in his living room for as long as I could remember. When the contractor asked what the room was for, I told him it was for someone who deserved the best acoustics in the house. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. The idea for the helicopter had been living in the back of my mind for years. On my 22nd birthday, I'd treated myself to a scenic flight over the Columbia River Gorge. I'd pressed my face against the window the entire time, watching the water below go silver, the mountains rising through the clouds, the forest spreading out in every direction like something endless. I'd come home and written a song before I'd even taken off my jacket. If that view could do that to me, I kept thinking, what might it do for someone whose world was quietly shrinking? For someone whose memories were starting to slip at the edges? I researched aircraft for 3 months before deciding. A Bell 407, sleek, stable, comfortable. Room for Donna Ruth, a nurse, and 2 passengers. I took flying lessons. But I was always clear with myself. I would never fly her alone. There would always be a certified pilot. The lessons were about understanding, not solo operation. I found a pilot I trusted, booked him on retainer, and arranged a small helipad to be paved in the back garden of the estate. Every detail of the plan was handled quietly. No announcements, no hints. Not to my parents, not to Renata, not to Lucas. As far as my family knew, I was still the waitress with the guitar and the apartment above the bookstore. Still the one who'd thrown her future away for a dream that hadn't paid off. Let them keep thinking that. Because the moment I decided to act, the moment the family meeting happened, which I knew was coming, I needed them to see it all at once, not hear about it. Not receive a phone call or a careful explanation in advance. See it in real time, with nothing to soften the edges. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was in the music room reviewing paint samples for the walls when my phone buzzed on the desk. Mom. Her voice had that particular clipped quality she gets when she's trying to hold something in. Isabella, we need a family meeting this weekend. About your grandmother. My stomach tightened. What's going on? We'll talk in person. She hung up before I could push further. I set the phone down and looked at the room around me. At the unfinished shelves, the covered piano, the window with its view of the garden going golden in the late afternoon light. The house was nearly ready. The helicopter was ready. The nurse I'd quietly hired 3 weeks ago was ready. I picked up the phone again and sent Clara a message. Be on standby this weekend. I may need everything at once. Her reply came in under a minute. Already am. I closed the notebook on my desk, capped the pen, and looked out the window for a long moment. Saturday was coming. And so was everything they hadn't seen coming. Saturday arrived the way difficult days often do, quietly, with no warning in the weather. The sky over Portland was the color of old pewter, the kind of flat gray that settles in October and doesn't move. I drove my old Subaru to my parents' house in Beaverton, the same car I'd had for 6 years, deliberately unwashed, a small dent in the rear bumper I'd never bothered to fix. Every detail mattered. I needed to look exactly like what they expected when I walked through that door. The house smelled of coffee and something baking in the oven. A normal Saturday smell. Deceptively warm. Dad was in his recliner with the newspaper folded in thirds the way he always read it. Mom was in the kitchen. Renata had driven down from Seattle and was sitting at the dining table in a blazer, her laptop open, half working even on a weekend. Lucas was on the couch with his phone, earbuds in, present in body only. Donna Ruth sat quietly in the corner armchair by the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was staring at the carpet with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is safer than engaging with a room that moves too fast. She looked smaller than the last time I'd seen her here. Or maybe the chair looked larger. Either way, something about it made my chest tighten. I sat down across from her and caught her eye. She gave me a small smile. Uncertain, but warm. We started with small talk, the kind that functions as a waiting room for the real conversation. Mom asked about my apartment. Dad mentioned the weather. Renata said something about traffic on I-5. I answered each question with the minimum required and waited. Then Mom cleared her throat. The room shifted slightly the way it always does when someone decides to say the thing. It's about Grandma, she began. Her memory has been slipping faster. Last week she left the stove on all night. The week before, she got confused walking back from the mailbox and a neighbor had to bring her inside. We can't keep pretending this isn't serious. I nodded slowly. I agree. She shouldn't be living alone. Dad looked up from his newspaper. Which is why we found a solution. There's a facility in Hillsborough. Clean, modern, well-staffed. We've already spoken to the admissions coordinator. If we split the cost between the four of us, it's manageable. Renata nodded without hesitation. It's the right call. I looked at the reviews. The staff-to-resident ratio is good. She'll be taken care of properly. Lucas pulled out one earbud. Makes sense to me. I can contribute from San Jose. I just can't be physically involved. That's not realistic. They kept talking. Logistics, costs, timelines, room availability. The conversation moved efficiently, the way conversations move when everyone in them has already decided and the meeting is just the formality. I looked at Donna Ruth. She was still staring at the carpet, but her hands, which had been resting loosely in her lap, were now pressed together, knuckles white. She wasn't asleep. She was listening to every word. She just hadn't been asked a single thing. She doesn't want a nursing home. The room paused. Dad folded his newspaper. Isabella. She wants to be with family. She's told me that, more than once. Mom's expression softened into the particular look she reserved for situations she considered hopeless. Honey, I understand that. But wanting something and it being possible are two different things. None of us are in a position to... I am, I said. A brief silence. Then Dad leaned back in his chair and let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh but was close enough. You, Sam. You're going to take care of her? With what? I'll manage. You're waiting tables, he said flatly. You can barely buy yourself food or clothes. We've all seen it. You show up here in the same jacket you've worn for 3 years. I'm not saying that to be cruel, but let's be honest about reality. You cannot provide for yourself, let alone take care of a woman with Alzheimer's. He said it with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact. Renata's voice followed, clipped and precise. This isn't about love, Isabella. We all love her. This is about capability. Care facilities exist because caring for someone with memory loss is a full-time medical responsibility. You can't just play guitar at her bedside and call it a plan. Lucas glanced up from his phone. We know you mean well, but let's be realistic. You don't have the resources for this. Mom reached across and put her hand on mine. It's not a failure to admit that. The facility will give her proper care. Professionals who know exactly what they're doing. She'll be safe. I looked around the table slowly, at each face. The patience in Mom's, the settled certainty in Dad's, the polished practicality in Renata's, the detached efficiency in Lucas's. And then I looked at Donna Ruth. She had lifted her eyes from the carpet and was looking directly at me. Not with confusion, with something clear and steady and tired. The look of someone who has been in the room the whole time, listening to people decide her life, and has run out of the energy to protest. I felt something settle in my chest, quiet and absolute. I stood up. You can all do what you want, but I'm taking care of her. My way. Dad's jaw tightened. Don't make promises you cannot keep. Not with her. Not with this. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, found Clara's name. Clara, get the helicopter ready. Bring it to the open field 3 blocks from my parents' house. I need it in 20 minutes. I put the phone back in my pocket. The table went very still. Then Dad frowned. What helicopter? Renata stared at me. Lucas slowly put his phone face down on the cushion beside him. Mom looked uncertain, like she was trying to find the version of this that made sense. And then, one by one, they laughed. Not mean laughter, exactly. More like the laughter of people who have decided a situation is absurd and are relieving the tension of it. Dad shook his head. Renata pressed her lips together in a thin smile. Lucas made a small sound that he tried to disguise as a cough. A helicopter, Dad repeated, with the tone of someone humoring a child. I looked at the room one more time. Then I walked to Donna Ruth's chair, crouched down beside her and spoke quietly. Grandma, we're going for a ride. She looked at me with those tired, clear eyes. Where are we going, Isa? I smiled. Home. The October air outside was sharp enough to sting. I walked out of my parents' house with Donna Ruth's hand resting lightly on my arm. The nurse I'd hired 3 weeks ago, who had been waiting quietly in my car the entire time, coming around to take her other side. Behind us, I could hear the others following. Not because they'd decided to cooperate, because they didn't know what else to do. The field was 3 blocks away, a worn rectangle of grass where kids played soccer in the summer and nobody went in October. I'd walked past it 100 times growing up without ever imagining I'd use it for something like this. We stood at the edge of it and waited. I checked my phone. Clara had confirmed 22 minutes. We were at 19. Dad came to stand beside me, hands in his pockets. Isabella, I don't know what you think is about to happen, but The sound stopped him. It started low and distant, a deep, rhythmic thrum that you feel before you properly hear it. Then it grew, filling the gray sky from somewhere beyond the tree line to the south. Heads turned along the street. A woman walking her dog stopped and looked up. 2 kids on bikes braked at the corner. Then it appeared. The Bell 407 came over the tree line, smooth and unhurried, its black body catching what little light the October sky offered. Rotor wash already reaching us before it had fully descended. It was not small. It was not subtle. It moved with the kind of deliberate confidence that makes people stop whatever they're doing and simply watch. I heard Mom make a sound behind me. Not words, just a sound. The helicopter descended into the field, the grass flattening in wide circular waves beneath it, leaves lifting and spinning in a golden spiral that scattered across the street. The skids touched down with a solid finality. The engine maintained its controlled thunder. The pilot gave me a single nod through the windscreen. I turned around. Dad was standing completely still, his newspaper still tucked under his arm from the house. Forgotten. His jaw was set, but his eyes were doing something different, moving between me and the helicopter and back again, recalculating something he didn't have enough information to solve yet. Mom had both hands pressed to her mouth. Renata had gone very still in the way that lawyers go still when something has happened that they didn't anticipate and need a moment to process. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. Lucas had both earbuds out. He was staring at the helicopter with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since we were children watching something genuinely surprising. I looked at all of them for exactly 1 second. Then I turned back to Donna Ruth. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the aircraft with an expression I hadn't seen in months. Pure, uncomplicated wonder. The kind that bypasses whatever the illness had been slowly drawing a curtain over and comes from somewhere deeper, somewhere older. "Oh, Isa," she breathed. "Thomas would have loved this." My throat tightened. "I know, Grandma." We walked her across the field, the nurse steady on her left, me on her right. The rotor wind was strong enough to pull at her hair and she laughed, a short bright sound, and reached up to hold it down with one hand. I helped her into the cabin, got her settled, placed the headset gently over her ears. She looked out the window at the field, at the houses, at the ordinary Saturday street, and her face was lit up like a child seeing something for the first time. I turned back to my parents. "Mom, Dad, you're coming. Renata, Lucas, follow by car. I'll text you the address." Nobody argued. I think the helicopter had temporarily removed their ability to argue. Mom climbed in first, moving carefully, her eyes going to my face every few seconds like she was searching for the explanation she hadn't been given yet. Dad followed, settling into the seat beside her, his posture still carrying the rigidity of a man who hasn't yet decided how to feel about something. The door closed, the engine note shifted, and then the ground fell away. Donna Ruth pressed her hand to the window as the field shrank beneath us, as the neat grid of my parents' neighborhood pulled back and became a small square in a larger pattern of streets and rooftops and trees blazing with autumn color. The Willamette River appeared to the west, a wide silver stroke across the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said softly, to no one in particular. Mom was gripping her seatbelt with both hands, her eyes moving between the window and me. "Isabella," she said through the headset, her voice careful. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." Dad said nothing. He was looking out the window with the expression of a man in the middle of significantly revising something. We flew south, the city giving way to forest, the forest broken occasionally by farms and roads and the wide curves of the river. The mountains appeared ahead, snow on the upper peaks, clouds draped across the middle ridges like something painted. Donna Ruth spotted them and pointed, her finger tracing their outline against the window. For a few minutes, nobody spoke. Then the pilot banked east and began to descend. The estate came into view first as a shape among the trees, the deep red of the tiled roof visible through the maples, the cream walls catching the afternoon light. Then the full property opened up below us, the long driveway lined with maples that had turned the precise shade of amber that looks almost unreal in October. The garden, the patio, the roses climbing the stone walls. The helipad in the back garden, freshly paved, marked cleanly. We touched down, the engine wound down. The sudden quiet was enormous. I slid the door open and helped Donna Ruth down. She took 3 steps into the garden and stopped. She stood very still, her face tilted slightly upward, eyes moving over the roses, the maples, the warm-colored walls of the house. "It smells like home," she said quietly. Renata's Tesla pulled up the driveway 2 minutes later. She and Lucas stepped out and stood side by side, looking at the house with expressions I didn't have a single word for. "Whose is this?" Renata asked. I didn't answer. I led Donna Ruth through the back garden, through the wide rear door, and into the house. The foyer was warm, polished wood underfoot, a chandelier throwing soft amber light across the cream walls. The hallway opened into the living room, and in the corner, on a stand of dark walnut, carefully cleaned and placed exactly where I had planned it for months. Grandpa's accordion. Donna Ruth stopped walking. She crossed the room slowly and stood before it. Her hands rose and she touched it the way you touch something you were afraid you'd never see again. Her fingers found the worn strap, the buttons she knew by feel, the scratched corner on the left side from the time it had slipped off the kitchen chair in 1987. Antonio's, she whispered. Yes, I said. This is your home now, Grandma. Ours. The room was completely silent. Then Dad's voice, low and stripped of everything it usually carried. Sam, how? I turned to face them. All four of them standing in the doorway of the living room, looking at me like they were seeing someone they'd misidentified for years and had only just realized it. I took a breath. For the past 6 years, I've been writing music under the name Lua Chuva. Silence. Rain and Accordion was mine. So were 60-something other songs you've heard on the radio, in films, in commercials, on playlists. I've earned over $25 million in royalties and investments. I bought this house. I bought the helicopter. I hired the nurse. I planned all of it. For her. Nobody moved. Mom's eyes filled. She pressed both hands over her mouth, her shoulders beginning to shake. Dad stood absolutely still, the newspaper still under his arm, staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before in my life. Renata whispered so quietly it was almost only breath. You wrote Rain and Accordion? Yes. She looked at the floor, then back at me. Isabella. It's one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. Lucas's eyes were wet. He looked down at his shoes, then up at me. I write too, he said. Songs. I've never told anyone. I looked at my brother for a long moment. Then maybe it's time you did. Donna Ruth's voice came from the corner, soft and certain. Isa, you remind me so much of your grandfather. And the room, which had been holding its breath, finally let it go. The days after the reveal moved differently. Not faster, not slower, just differently. Like a song that has finally resolved its central tension and can breathe into its final movement without hurrying. I noticed it first in the mornings at the estate, the particular quality of the light coming through the kitchen windows, the sound of birds in the maples, the faint creak of Donna Ruth's rocking chair on the patio, while she held her tea with both hands and watched the garden come awake. She settled into the house like she'd always belonged there. Some mornings she was sharp and present, remembering the names of songs, asking about specific records, telling me stories about Sio Antonio that I'd never heard before, small private memories she'd been keeping for decades. Other mornings the fog was heavier, and she'd ask me twice where she was, or call me by a name that wasn't mine. But those mornings had a rhythm too, and I learned to move inside them without panic. The nurse, Fernanda, was calm and warm and had a gift for redirecting confusion without making it feel like correction. On the harder mornings, I'd sit at the piano in the music room and play softly, letting the sound drift through the house. Within minutes, Donna Ruth would appear in the doorway in her robe, drawn by the music the way she'd always been drawn by Grandpa's accordion, and the fog would thin a little. Some things go deeper than memory. Music, it turns out, is one of them. My family began visiting on weekends. The first few times, they arrived carrying the particular energy of people who owe something and aren't sure how to pay it. Dad brought fruit and a bottle of wine and stood in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, looking at the house with careful eyes. Mom brought flowers and immediately began helping in the kitchen without being asked, chopping vegetables beside me while I worked through a melody at the counter, both of us quiet in a way that felt, for the first time in years, comfortable rather than loaded. Renata surprised me most. The third weekend she visited, she found me on the patio after dinner, the garden dark and the lights of the valley visible in the distance. She sat down across from me without her blazer, without her phone, and was quiet for a moment before she spoke. I've been thinking, she said, about the choice you made at 18. I waited. I had the grades for a music conservatory, she said. Did you know that? I played piano for 11 years. I was good enough. But I looked at the way Mom and Dad talked about it and I decided it wasn't worth the fight. She paused. I've been a lawyer for 6 years and I'm good at it, but I chose it because it felt safe, not because it was mine. I didn't say anything for a while. The valley lights blurred softly below us. It's not too late, I finally said. She looked at me. To play piano? To find what's yours. She didn't answer, but she nodded slowly once, in the way people nod when they're filing something away to return to later in private. Lucas came the following weekend with his guitar. He'd bought it 3 years ago, he told me, and kept it in the closet of his apartment in San Jose because the walls were thin and he was embarrassed to play where anyone might hear. He sat in the music room and played me 4 original pieces, his eyes on the floor the whole time, braced for a reaction he'd trained himself to expect. I listened to all 4 without interrupting. When he finished, I told him the truth, that the second one had something extraordinary in the chord transition in the middle section, that the fourth had a lyrical instinct most writers spent years trying to develop, that he had been sitting on something real while hiding it in a closet. He looked up. You're not just saying that. Lua Chuva doesn't just say things, I said. He laughed. Actually laughed the way he used to when we were kids and the house still felt like neutral ground. It was the best sound I'd heard from him in years. The Sunday helicopter tradition began the third week. If the weather was clear, I'd arrange the flight in the morning, and by early afternoon we'd have Donna Ruth settled in the cabin, headset on, hands folded in her lap, face already turned toward the window before we'd even lifted off. We flew over the river, over the forests, out toward the mountains when the visibility was good enough to make the peaks worth seeing. She didn't always speak on those flights. Sometimes she narrated everything she saw, pointing at landmarks, asking questions, connecting what was below to memories I'd never heard before. Other times she sat in complete silence, her face soft, watching the landscape move beneath us with an expression that I can only describe as held. Like someone holding something carefully, because they know it's precious, and they're not sure how long they'll be able to hold it. On one of those flights, somewhere over the southern edge of the city, she reached over and put her hand on mine without looking away from the window. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. One evening in late November, after the others had gone home and the house had settled into its night sounds, I sat with Donna Ruth in the music room. The chandelier was dimmed low. The turntable was spinning one of So Antonio's old records, something slow and quiet, a melody that moved through the room like water. She was in her armchair with a blanket over her knees, her eyes half closed, her fingers moving faintly against the armrest in time with the music. After a while, she said, without opening her eyes, "Sam." She sometimes called me Sam. I'd stopped correcting it. Sam was close enough to Issa in the geography of her memory, and whatever name she reached for, she always meant me. "Yes, Grandma. You didn't just give me a house." I looked at her. "You gave me my life back." Her eyes opened slowly. They were clear in that moment. Fully clear. "I see him here, you know. In the music. In the garden. I see Antonio." I didn't trust my voice for a moment. "I know," I finally said. "I put him everywhere I could." She smiled and closed her eyes again. I stayed in the chair across from her until the record finished, the needle reaching the end of the groove and circling the silence at the center. I didn't get up to change it. I just sat in the quiet with her and let the room be still. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I stood alone in the music room and looked at Grandpa's accordion on its dark walnut stand in the corner. The light caught the worn metal of the keys, the scratched corner, the strap he'd worn smooth with years of use. I thought about the 8-year-old with 4 notes on a piece of math homework. I thought about the 18-year-old with a duffel bag and $400 and a guitar and no map at all. I thought about every closed door and every long night and every phone call from my parents that had ended in the particular silence of people who love you and don't understand you and can't figure out how to hold both of those things at once. And I thought about what Donna Ruth had said. "You gave me my life back." But she was wrong about the direction of it. She and Sue Antonio had given me mine first, had handed it to me on a Sunday afternoon in a living room full of music, and told me it was worth keeping. Everything I'd built, every song, every royalty, every choice that had looked like recklessness from the outside had grown from that, from permission, from the particular courage of being believed in by 2 people when no one else was paying that kind of attention. The house was full of that belief now. Built from it, really. And somewhere in the structure of it, in the music room and the garden and the amber light of the chandelier and the sound of the turntable in the evening, Sue Antonio was still here, still playing. I walked to the stand in the corner, ran my fingers along the worn strap of the accordion, and stood there for a moment in the quiet. Then I went to the piano, sat down, opened the fallboard, and began to play. Not for anyone, just because the song wasn't over yet.